Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. We're going to be giving participants just about 1 minute to go ahead and filter in. So we'll be starting in about 1 minute. Thank you very much. All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining our session. My name is Shadrach Roberts from Mercy Corps, and it's my pleasure to moderate the panel on strengthening data management practices and capacities for partners today. If this is not the session you were planning on attending, I think you should make it the session you plan on attending and stay with us. We got a great group of folks with you. I'm going to be taking just a few minutes to introduce the topic and briefly introduce our speakers. And then each of our speakers is going to give a presentation. We're going to do all the presentations in a row. And we really encourage you to use the chat to post questions. We'll do a Q&A after all the speakers have finished their presentations, which I'll be moderating, and we'll definitely be pulling from the questions that you've posted in the chat, as well as some other questions that we have. This is a really important topic. I was taking a look at the list of the folks that are some of the folks that have signed up and joining us today, and I saw a lot of wonderfully familiar faces and names, and a lot of the folks that I think that are on this call have been a major part of the use of technology in the promotion of data and analysis and better sort of more modern methods of working in the development and humanitarian sector over the last 10 years. And I would expect that many of you have probably noticed that even while there's this massive increase in how much data that the sector collects, how much technology that we use, that hasn't necessarily always been matched by an attendant rise in data security, in responsible data practices. And that as a sector, those are some things that we're tending to catch up with. So we're in this situation now where we have lots and lots of humanitarian and development data, and many organizations are both a partner to another organization and are looking for ways to improve their data management practices, and at the same time have other partners who are looking to them for help with their data management practices. So I know that many of us, our organizations, have multiple different types of partnerships in ways in which we're trying to improve data management capacity. It's also a really important topic because there's just a lot on the line. I think it was at ICT4D last year. I can't remember if it was ICT4D or RightsCon, but it was around the same time that the Human Rights Watch report on UNHCR and data sharing without consent landed. In the last year, we've had breaches at a variety of organizations, and we've seen full-scale regime change in at least one country that puts decades of data at risk. So this is something that we're increasingly having to contend with as a sector. So today we're going to be sort of coming at this in a variety of ways. We're going to be looking at various training materials that exist. We're going to examine some case studies, and we're going to be considering different types of partnerships that will allow us as a sector and as different organizations to meet these challenges. So the speakers today from IFRC, we have Mununuri Masori, Senior Information Management Planning and Reporting Officer. From Bixal, we have Paula Garcia, and from ONA, we have Megan Schrader and Tanvir Nat. So I'd like to welcome all of our speakers, and we're going to start today with Mununuri Masori from IFRC. So Munu, I think we'll hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Shadrach. Thanks for the introduction. And I just want to welcome everybody to this session and just my small presentation on data management and the data playbook. Essentially, how we at the FRC are trying to use data literacy to improve data management practices, how we're trying at the FRC to improve data literacy across our network of 192 national societies, as well as within the Secretariat, on how to better manage our data through use of the data playbook. As Shadrach said, my name is Munenori Musori, and I'm with the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, based here in Geneva. I've been working in the Information Management Unit for the last 10 years, Information Management Unit in Geneva, but I've been with the FRC for the last 10 years. Working in the area of monitoring and evaluation in Haiti after the earthquake and the cholera outbreak, working in East Africa, based in Nairobi for about 2.5 years, working on the M&E components of our responses to epidemics, population movement, floods, and other hazards that affect that particular sub-region. And before the FRC, I was also working for 10 years in monitoring and evaluation, working for various NGOs, including Mexico, Africa, and Plan International. So essentially, data literacy is key for all humanitarian services, and the data management component is core to effective and sustainable protection of data, and for the analysis for effective decision making. And this is what the data playbook is trying to bring about, a greater understanding of all these different concepts. What we use as our definition for data literacy essentially is that it includes the skills, the knowledge, attitudes, social structures required for different populations to use data. So we want to really have that kind of a transformation as enshrined in our digital transformation strategy, to ensure that we have those skills, those knowledge, that knowledge around data literacy and how to manage the data that we collect, that we analyze, and that we effectively disseminate. So why are we using the data playbook as our vehicle for this? Essentially, it's because we want to improve knowledge and skills around data management and knowledge and skills on how to support our emergency response work. And we want to create team spaces for understanding what data management is, understanding what analysis is, and how do we create best practices around data management and around analysis. And we want to strengthen collaborations around responsible data use, responsible data management, and how we ensure that we are responsible for our data throughout the journey that the data takes from being collected to being collated, to being analyzed, visualized, and disseminated. So at IFRC, working with our partner with the national societies that form the IFRC, the 192 national societies, we've gone on a journey to create this data playbook led by a data literacy lead. And we've created this playbook essentially for Red Cross and Red Crescent staff and volunteers, but can be used by all other organizations as well to improve data literacy from the ground up. And essentially, the data playbook is for teams, not really to be used for individual learning, but by teams, in order to strengthen practices, strengthen community of practices around responsible data use and around data management across the whole journey. So essentially, who is it for? It's for the data curious. People want to get into working with data. People want to get into data collection, want to get into managing the data that has been collected, to analyze it. People, so the data curious will just want to know what is happening, as well as for the advocates who are there to advocate for evidence-based decision-making, advocates to ensure that people get into data analysis, who want to support people in their journey to be able to become analysts. And it's also for the data active. People who are actively collecting it as primary data collectors, the secondary data collectors, and for analysts and programmers, and for the data ready, who are ready to get onto the journey to either be analysts or to support in protecting the data that we collect and to manage it as well. So what can this data lead to? What we're looking for, what we look into the data is, once we collect it, we want it to create information. but essentially we wanted to support in the decision makings that happen at the ground level for our response operations. So we want to be evidence-based in terms of our decision-making so that we support the most vulnerable groups. And we want to glean insights based on this data and create a wealth of knowledge, which can be shared in discussions like this and forums like this. So we want to really be able to gain information and create knowledge and inform decisions on the ground to ensure that we are all data-driven organizations and evidence-based in all the work that we do. So what is new in the data playbook? We had the beta version, which was developed between 2016 and 2018. Now we have version 1 of this. And with now this new version that we have, it's about understanding how data matters. In order to be able to use data, in order to become more curious and to be active, you need to understand why it matters for decision making, why it matters, and how do we collect it. And we want to create a culture or a data culture around our different teams within national societies and within the IFRC Secretariat. Based on this, we're better able to manage the data sets that we have and actually be able to create our data schemas, our data architecture for collecting it and analyzing the data. So we also have a module on how to get data and doing survey design, collection and storage of that data. And we're looking at, do we just collect all the data points that are available there, or do we collect what is missing? Are there secondary data sources that we can refer to? How are we managing that information? And what extra do we need to collect? And just collect the minimum amount of information that will enable us to make better decisions. So that's a module we've strengthened within the new data playbook. And we have also looked at how to make data more useful for ourselves and for others by using open data standards and having better data standards as well for the data, for both management of the data as well as for the analysis. One module which is pretty new for the data playbook this year is on understanding and analyzing the data. And this really looks at the whole data analysis spectrum, looking at all the different steps that are required for the analysis and who are the different people involved and when do we do individual analysis and when do we do more collaborative analysis and what are the different kinds of analysis that we're doing, explanatory analysis, anticipatory analysis, or we're just exploring the data. And this is a module that I was heavily involved in and would really like to see a lot more use of it going into the future. So I'm a bit more passionate about that one. But also we're looking at responsible data use and working with our data protection lead. We've been working on how to be more responsible with our data, how to ensure that we only collect the minimum data and be sure that we apply all the data protection processes to all the different data that we're collecting. Then more important, then also is equally important, how do we present and visualize it to the different stakeholders? And the different stakeholders would be key decision makers within your operation, or it could be senior management, or to be going back to the community to say, this is the data we collected from you, how accurate is it? Does it really reflect what you told us? But you need to package it for all those different stakeholders that we have. And then there is a module on making decisions with that data. We've collected it, we've analyzed it. What we want to do is really influence decisions at the organizational level, influence decision at the community level with that data that we've collected and analyzed. Essentially what we've looked at is the entire data information management cycle, as well as our data management cycle, in order to come up with the data, with the new version of the data playbook, which really helps us with all the issues around data management. And for the information management within disaster and crisis, we do have a data management platform called the Go platform. I'll also put the link in the chat, where the data that we collect from the field is visualized, both for the public and for internal purposes, where in the background also we collect data from other IFRC systems using an API, and we manage the data on the API and visualize it on the Go platform. So the Go platform is there to ensure that we have all the information related to any hazard that is interacting with communities, and ensuring that that information is available to different stakeholders for the different decisions that they need to make around this. And the Go platform has been our main platform for managing disaster-related data. And we launched this platform in 2018, replacing our previous disaster information management system, which was called DMIS. And we do have other tools that are in our arsenal for managing our data. We also host COBO and ODK servers, and we have a dedicated platform for collecting that data, managing it within the IFRC, analyzing it, and visualizing it. And we also have a collaborative tool that we were working with other organizations, the DEEP platform for collaboratively analyzing and managing qualitative data. So essentially, in a nutshell, I would want to leave it at that. Hopefully, we'll be able to share with you the data playbook, and you'll be able to visit our data management platform, the Go platform. And just to say, we also work with movement partners, the SIMS network, whenever we have an active operation, and the SIMS network helps us with managing our data, analyzing it, visualizing it using different tools, and ultimately hosting that also on the Go platform. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Munenori. That was fantastic. I'm happy to say that I've benefited myself from the IFRC playbook, so it's really great to hear about some of the changes and some of the I guess I wouldn't call them upgrades, the new additions, some of the value additions that are going to be coming in version 2. There are some links in the chat already for the playbook and others. So thanks to Heather for posting those. Hi, Heather. Great to see you in. Next, we have from Bixol, we have Paula Garcia. Paula, you want to take us away?
Sure. Thank you, Shadrach, and hello, everyone. And my name is Paula Garcia. I am a Bixol's cybersecurity engineer, and this project I'm going to talk about is actually a project that was funded by the USAID, and so we'll talk a little bit about the challenge, why the project came about, an overview of the program. Then we'll get into the activities around the digital health, and we will finish up a little bit on touching on the importance of the local partners that we were able to partner with. So just to give you a little bit of an overview in the challenge, right? There's a point in time now where we have seen the increase in technologies, we've seen the increase in use of digital systems, in mobile phones, right? And so Colombia in itself, we understood the ecosystem in there. They had a very robust set of civil societies, nonprofit organizations that were in need of some help. People started to use the technology more, right? They needed it for their businesses in order to continue. But it was also, there was a little bit of a gap in the use of technology and how to make a better use, safer use of technology and the data that they were handling. So sometimes we found that there were, some of these organizations, implementing partners, really were not aware of the risk of having the data and not protecting the data as with best practices. So that was the challenge, and we come in and right, it's USAID funded this project through, it's called the Digital Apex. So Digital Apex, it's the activity that was funded by USAID. The activity in itself, it's meant to strengthen the cybersecurity practices for local programs. In this case, we partner in Colombia with USAID Colombia. The project was led by PMCG, and then Bixol itself was awarded this task order. And so then we went out and partner with FC International, which they are a local Colombian organization. And the program in itself was divided into 3 phases. We'll get into the phases and the details of the phases in a little bit more just in a bit, but just the overview, there were 3 phases. The first phase, we wanted to generate some cybersecurity awareness, digital health, how to better protect yourself. The data is there, we need to use it. So might as well start getting some use, but with good practices, right? So that phase number one was generating that awareness through some webinars. It's a little bit of self-guided cyber security trainings. Then we came to phase two, where we actually provided a little bit of direct technical assistance just to a specific set of group. And we'll get into the selection criteria that we used and how we actually came up with a smaller set of implementing partners. And then the phase number three was developing and disseminating action plans. We worked with the individuals in the companies, and we said, okay, here are your weaknesses, here are your strengths. Let's make some action items. Let's work so that you have a list of things to actually, strengthen the cybersecurity of the company in those places where we saw that there was a little bit of a gap, right? So the activities in itself, just to get into the details, the phase number one, when we actually developed some cybersecurity trainings, there was a huge, there were about 44 implementing partners. Again, these are implementing partners within Colombia, and we had almost over 170, we reached over 170 people that we were able to provide this type of cybersecurity training. And it was very basic. And believe it or not, sometimes these organizations, even the basic things, are sometimes a little forgotten. And so we understood that, and what we wanted to do is create these trainings around topics that were understandable and also easy to implement, to start with like a good base of a cyber hygiene. So some of the topics were introduction to cybersecurity, just general introductions, management of passwords. We understood a little bit of like these organizations and what were their weaknesses, how to secure their online connections, social network safety, email security, cloud storage and security, mobile security. The key here is when we partner with the local organization, they actually understood, right? Like they were from Colombia. They understood the locality of these organizations. They also were able to help the language gaps at some point, and they also understood the technologies, because being here in the US, sometimes our organizations don't realize that the organizations have maybe a smaller set of technology, or they may be using a different type of infrastructure. Their systems in-house may be different and sometimes outdated. So we had to understand that, and that's where some of the key components play when we actually partner with local partners, in this case, FC International. And so we went on and created this set of webinars. We had a reach of over 170 implementing partners and their employees. And then phase two is where we actually said, okay, everybody got this training. They all were able to get their basics, understand. We had some, within the trainings, we had some ways to assess their knowledge. And so by the end of this, we ended up coming up with a selection process to get a little bit more, I will say, focused training to just a selected, just a set of implemented partners. In this case, we went down to about 10, from 44 to about 10. And so we were looking for some selection criteria. It's like we were looking for small organizations, some organizations that had the potential impact of sensitive data breach, right? Like who were those that were more vulnerable, individuals that were employed at high risk in regions that perhaps were devastated by violence. Again, we wouldn't be able to determine this with accuracy if we were not partnering with local institutions, right? So that's, I think, something that we actually really appreciated at the time, because also, if we remember, this activity happened between October 2020 and May 2021, and that was right when we were in the middle of the pandemic, and we pretty much had to pivot. This was supposed to be an activity where we came to the organizations and worked on site with them, but because of the pandemic and the restrictions, we had to turn this into a more of a digital set, which in fact, it brings up the point where the timeline played a really important factor as well, because technology at that time, if we all remember, right, it was everybody was working on site, but then everybody had to switch online. And a lot of organizations started for the push to go digital. And so for us, it was important to understand that at the time and also help the employees, the implementing partners that were attending this webinar, help them understand how important was even, how it was even more important at the time to actually be aware of all of these changes. And so it was key, and it was also, I would say, perfect timing for us to bring this set of knowledge to them. Some of these individuals also were self-identifying as not being prepared to prevent a cyber attack. So that played a huge role, right? Because when you have your organizations that are have threats, and like you have sensitive data, but sometimes maybe don't understand the risks of having this data and not knowing if it's protected or not, it comes with like it plays a big role. So understanding this helped us narrow down to a specific set of implementing partners. In this case, we went down to 10. And so we worked with the individuals. And it was important for us to also understand who were the best point of context within the implementing partners organizations, and provide to them a set of tools and knowledge a little bit more detailed to their organizations. And so that was phase number 3. And that was phase number 2. And then we come to phase number 3, where we actually are working with individuals, and we tell them, okay, this is, this is what you have. These are your strengths, and these are your weaknesses. Here is where you can go in and put some recommendation action items in place to actually improve the digital health of your organization. And again, you have, we were dealing with companies or organizations that perhaps they did not have access to the internet when they were working, right? So a lot of these different factors play a big role when we are deciding, what are their needs, and what are their different set of skills that they're going to need for their specific duties. So that actually brings me back to the point of like how important it is to partner with the local organization. At this time with us, it was more of an organization where we said, okay, they understand the needs of these local implementing partners, and they're also going to know like where their settings are, where they're geographically located, and how we can actually differentiate between those that need it the most. And so, yeah, that's how we ended up coming up with the project. It was a huge success, and we actually were really happy to have done this and continue the work in Latin America.
Fantastic, Paola. Thank you very, very much. That it does sound like a very exciting project. I was reading the case study last night, and the reach and the number of people you were able to get to, especially in the middle of a pandemic, I think is really impressive. And this is especially important because, as you mentioned, the pandemic kind of exacerbates some of these questions about data practices, how we're using technology. So thank you very much for that. All right, we're going to move on now to Ona, Megan Schrader, Tanvir Nat. Folks, it's over to you.
Thanks. So I'm Megan Schrader, and I think Tanvir will start us off in the presentation.
Thanks, Megan. So our key topic discussion over here is how the private sector plays a collaborative role in supporting to build capacity development, address costs, and ensure sustainability. So this topic came in mind is because I recently had the pleasure of being part of a diverse cohort attending the data stewardship executive course designed by Stefan Werholst, sorry, I can't pronounce the last name, and Andrew Young at the GovLab. At the time, I was working for a not-for-profit organization, and so my journey through the GovLab data collaborative methodology was viewed primarily from the development sector lens. Then coincidentally, when I transitioned from not-for-profit to the private sector, and Ona was here with a mission to provide solutions for data for development initiatives. And so this required me to refocus the application of the methodology to a more private sector perspective, which now I had the best of both the worlds, led to a realization of the potential role that the private sector actually plays as data stewards for not-for-profit organizations, but eventually also for governments to address challenges in the phases that have been highlighted during the methodology. So, I mean, some of the phases, I will walk through the phases. One was demand, and we felt that there was succinct definitions to the issues that needed to be solved. And the idea was that there existed a solution for these use cases. However, now when we bring in the learnings from the data stewardship, it was now from our angle to sit down with our clients or with the NGO sector and actually understand the challenges within the use cases and actually segment it down even smaller and smaller. There is a piece which is the 100 questions approach. And so like a child, you will ask, so I have a problem and this is the solution, but why? But why? But why? And eventually you end up with a whole bunch of whys to which you have answered, and you realize that there is a potential to solve that problem. And these are one of the issues from the demand side that we've seen from the development sector and the ecosystem. From the supply side, there have been challenges in regards to skilled resources, technology, hosting, data sets, even partnerships, right? And so NGOs are able to address these issues, but only within a limited scope and a budget and within the lifetime of that specific project. Then what happens once you need to transition it, once again, to the government or the adopting entity, right? And then another area within one of the other phases is the partnership space, where trying to establish cross-collaborative partnerships, in a sense, trying to tie together the government, trying to tie together funders and other NGOs, and even the private sector. How do we go about that? And how do we develop that kind of partnership which is future-looking to ensure that there is sustainability, even though one of the parties have to drop out of it because their contribution to the project is completed, right? And then we come down to the design phase of things, and design is not just limited to identifying the use cases, but what are the data sets that are available? How do we identify which data actually answers which questions, and establishing the various possibilities of reuse of data that is available out there in the ecosystem to prevent repetitive tasks, reduce costs, and so on. And then eventually it comes down to the development of insights, which leading to now strategic decision-making, which help governments and so on to develop these policies. And so introducing complex statistical models or algorithms because it's the cool thing to do and I can afford to do it. But then at the end of the day, and it's the question is it really answering your question, right? And these at times become unnecessary investments, can lead to inconsistency in outputs and so on. And so, I mean, the role of OCHA and HDX come into play, but I'll let Megan discuss a bit more further on the advantages. And then finally, the biggest issue is systemization and sustainability of the solutions, right? Funders come in, fund a project, and then there is a need for the government to now take on this project and figure out what to do, how to sustain it further from a financial and resource point of view. Challenges in funding, challenges in having skilled resources have come up over and over and over again. And the question is, does the private sector, being commercially inclined, be able to provide a business model, right? And have those insights. So, in a nutshell, these are the challenges that we've kind of identified within the phases. And now I'd like to hand it over to Megan, who will now contextualize these phases into 4 categories, which we thought were very important for collaboration, capacity development, cost and sustainability of data for development initiatives, starting from their inception, and then also supporting the transition from the donor to the government. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Tanvir. So I'm going to just kind of bring it all together and see how we can apply the challenges that Tanvir just discussed to the three specific areas identified: collaboration, capacity, cost, and sustainability, and the role that the private sector plays in that. So from a collaboration perspective, we work a lot with our clients who are actually working in the development sector, who are the programmatic experts and better understand the challenge in the field, while the private sector working more with the technology, we have a better understanding of how to build the system and innovate new ways of solving those challenges. So NGOs and organizations are working privately with the public sector to better define the problem statements and build technology solutions while balancing the constraints to deliver the best possible solution. So we want to work actively with those who are actively deploying these projects, working in the field, because they better understand the context, not only in the technical from the programmatic side, but also field environment as well. Some of the things that this could include, kind of applying it to the previous steps that Tanvir talked about, is ensuring that we have well-defined proposals with a detailed scope and cost-effective budgets for both parties. And from more of the private sector, we need to continue investing in our client tools based on the feedback from our clients to ensure that they're balancing the needs of both those that are using the tools and those that are providing you the tools to develop those solutions. There's also defining project requirements, identifying the project needs, which comes specifically from those who are using the tools, so the clients, and defining the different ways in which we can actually use these tools, kind of providing the pros and cons. That's kind of the role that we as the private sector play. So we understand the problem that you have, and we can think of the different ways in which to combine these. There's obviously constraints with all technology, so we can provide you with the pros of going one way versus another. And that kind of provides that collaborative environment. NGOs and organizations, our clients best understand how the data is collected, the key questions that they're trying to answer through their analysis. However, with data easily collected or available, many users sometimes desire to collect more data, do additional analysis, but we sometimes like to ensure we're the ones that are kind of guiding the clients to ensure that we are adhering to the best practices, ensuring that the tools that they're utilizing are actually utilized for the purposes that they would like to use them for, such as ensuring that we're creating meaningful dashboards and encouraging only necessary data collection and key visualizations to best tell that story, because we don't want to overwhelm those who are making the key decision makers with 20 different graphs showing kind of similar information. The two parties are able to kind of balance how to best tell that story while ensuring that we're using the best practices to provide that information. And kind of the last one is we can, based on the project use cases and the lessons learned and the collaborations on the projects that we're working together, we can figure out what works best and scale that to apply to similar types of problems or different contexts, reducing the need for continual pilots of new systems, continuing to have to build the capacity, and all of the other steps that go with starting new projects. From a cost perspective, cost has implications for both parties. Cost may affect an NGO or organization's ability to afford a service. Cost also affects a tech company's ability to continue investing and innovating in the ways that technology can be used in the development sector, such as building new tools or updating a dashboard. So the cost of the product or training to successfully use the product may affect the NGO's ability to use the tool and make a greater impact. But if that cost is too high, that also affects the ability of the tech provider to continue to create a tool that's even more useful. However, through some of these partnerships, we're able to build relationships with the users and kind of define them much more easily because it's used on a larger scale through the entire organization, meaning it's utilized at a greater scale on more projects. As well, the application to capacity, you need to be able to understand the products, the integration of the projects, and how they will be utilized by the client and applied to the projects. The capacity to use the system by the end users affects the project's adoption and overall success. So specifically around this, I want to ensure that the capacity needs are included as a part of the project proposal so that it can be continued to build the capacity over time and considering not only at the beginning, but in the end, especially if it's a longer project, to ensure more successful adoption. And lastly, looking at sustainability, since this is kind of a key to the projects in the development sector, well, handing over to smaller or local organizations or governments, if the client is handing the solution over and they don't have the means to pay for the capacity to use it or have been, the person they're handing it over to doesn't have the capacity to pay for it or the technical capacity to understand how to use it, this challenge and could affect the sustainability of it. So the sustainability kind of interplays into the other three quite highly because it's affected by the capacity, by the cost, and also by the collaboration that we have. I could go into a lot more detail talking about these specific steps within that framework and how that specifically applies. But I'm going to end here and hand it back to Shadrach.
All right, thank you very, very much. Really interesting to get a little bit more insight into the process there. I've used ONA, I've been exposed to ONA in the past, but it's great to hear a little bit more background on what those partnerships look like. So we're going to open it up for a Q&A now, and I'd really, again, encourage anyone who's attending to use the Q&A function. We've had a couple of questions come through, and we're starting to, some of the participants and panelists are starting to put in some answers. I have a broad question for all of you, and I'm going to build off of something that I think was kind of interesting that came through the Q&A. And Felix asks, how does your organization kind of push partners to implement action plans within a stipulated time frame? And I'm going to build on that a little bit. I think there's an important question there about how do you kind of support your partners maybe towards reaching their goals is another way to say that. But considering that so many of the challenges around data literacy, building data capacity are really social in nature, they're behavioral, they're changing the way people interact with things. I'm kind of curious, for each of you, what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen? I mean, we've heard from each of you about very sort of specific, you either have or you come from a place that has very specific and strong outputs and products. And I'd be curious to dig in a little bit more if there are specific sort of social challenges that you have to deal with. Ona, you began to talk about some of those a little bit there with the capacity, but I'd like to kind of open that question up. So I'll start back at the beginning, Mununuri, with you. What are there particular challenges, social challenges, organizational challenges that come up with trying to build data literacy in the different chapters? And if so, how do you respond to those? How do you kind of deal with those?
Thank you very much for that question. I think it's quite an important question. It's the challenges we've been facing a lot around having bandwidth, connectivity, and those are a bit difficult to resolve. We started an Excel training just to build up skills around Excel, a challenge across our different national societies, and looking at creating those spaces where people can work with each other and support each other in real time within their particular areas, because also we have different time zones that we're working with. So trying to build up champions within each of the different time zones that can support directly the different national societies within that particular ecosystem. Has been a way we've been trying to get around that. And then looking at putting together people who want to learn more around data analysis using, for instance, Excel. You also have different people at different levels, and having one generic training program also doesn't pretty much work the same way. And I think that's one of the challenges we're trying to overcome with the data playbook, that you can pick certain aspects and work with that as a team, not going through one structured program that starts from, okay, this is cell A1, you put in a number in that. So with the data playbook, we're trying to address some of those challenges of, okay, we're dealing with people at different points in their journeys on data literacy, even from the same geographical area, from the same organization, people are at different levels. Thank you.
Yeah. So that I think that's always a challenge, right? All these different sort of levels that different organizations are working at. So Paolo, what I would ask you, you just got done with Bixall doing this training, reaching a variety of partners, and you talked about how understanding their local context was important. I would guess that not all of those partners were at the same level, or some had very different contexts, or some had sort of different challenges. How did you go about working with different organizations to try and figure out the best way to both meet specific needs, but at the same time work within a project that requires you to train a fixed number of people in a fixed amount of time with somewhat standard trainings? What did that look like for your project?
Absolutely, and yeah, that's a great question, because we all face challenges, and understanding the key who the key point of context within each organization was really essential for us. We did face challenges in terms of like communication, trying to there were so many people involved, right? Trying to set everybody on their same schedules, and even sometimes where, like you said, we didn't really have the same organization sizes. Some organizations perhaps had even an IT department, but then we'll face some organizations that they didn't even have a specific or dedicated person in their with them actually doing IT. And so that was actually challenging. But I think once we started, after our selection criteria, and in this process, we involved their already, like their persons, we had to request for a person of a POC that actually, even if they didn't have an IT person in their companies or organizations, that we could reach out to. And so that's what we ended up doing, and try to get everybody engaged, even the key stakeholders and the persons within the organizations that were requesting this type of training and help.
Yeah, fantastic. Tanvir and Megan, you spoke a little bit about working on that capacity piece and trying to understand that. Can you talk a little bit more about what that's like coming from the private partner? I think a lot of times when people think about partnerships, especially private, public, or government, a lot of it comes down to funding usually, and some sort of material support. But there's also a lot of a knowledge that can be leveraged there, right? So how do you get at some of the more social issues, behavioral, organizational issues with partners?
Megan, would you like
Sure.
to take the question?
Yeah, I'm going to take this one. So with a lot of the partners that we work with, we work to try and understand what they're trying to achieve with the trainings, but also with the specific trainings, we also really do depend on the clients that we're working with, because again, we always say that our clients are the knowledge experts. They understand the audience that they're working with. We have experience working with people all the way from data enumerators all the way up to data analysts who are building the actual dashboard. So we just try to customize our trainings, and we recommend kind of trying to adhere to that and try and anticipate what levels you have going into those trainings, and building them around that. But sometimes you have unexpected people jump into trainings or added, and you just kind of go with the flow of things and kind of use previous experience and just try to engage everyone depending on what level. It also really helps to have more people involved when you have different varying levels, so you can have different people assisting. So group efforts as well really help.
Yeah, Tanvir, go ahead, please.
So yeah, just to add on to what Megan was saying is that it's like the playbooks, the data for development playbooks. I haven't read the one from CRC, but I have read the one from Digital Impact Alliance. And one of the key approaches that I've noticed across a methodology in approaching specifically skill sets is to be able to establish personas initially, right? To understand who actually are going to be involved in the specific initiative. And then within that persona is now to actually have the individual organizations accountable to identify who fits these profiles within the specific personas. And then based on that, training programs are actually developed. And so then from there, you'd know that the level of skill required is, okay, so someone knows SQL language, understands how to manage SQL. And so we go at that level. And then if we realize that it's now just basics on this map looks pretty and this is how you change the color kind of situation. So that's one of the approaches that we actually look into as well.
Yeah. So that leads me to a question that's come into the Q&A. You know, you're talking about different personas there, so different individuals that have different skill sets within an organization. And Clara is asking a question: are you finding that the pool of staff to be trained or supported is growing with time? And for me, that's an interesting question, because on one hand, you can ask, you know, that is there a pool of staff that are more and more people needing to be trained? I'm also curious if you're seeing an increase in the number of staff that maybe come in with that have some sort of background in data literacy, since it's something that's becoming so important. So I'm kind of curious for all of you, as you work with different partners, and then Mununuri for your different chapters, if you're seeing more and more sort of new staff come in with some basics in data literacy, data management, or if you're not, and if that pool of people that you think you need to train is getting bigger as time goes on. Does everyone in an organization need to have some data management, data literacy skill, or is it only one person that really needs to do it? Paula, I'll start with you. I'm kind of curious to get your feedback on that question.
Yeah, for us, it was interesting because the cybersecurity field is pretty new to us. And so I actually had just came from getting my skills into cybersecurity. And so partnering, right, with the local partners was key and essential, where we were able to use and leverage those skills. So again, we do have a set of team. We didn't just need people like that knew cybersecurity, but we also needed like project managers. We had to come up with, I believe we had an graphic designer as well that helped us put some materials together. And so it is a team effort. And we need to make sure that, even a data and analytics person, which helped us understand what we were dealing with, and even put afterwards some numbers together to come up with our criteria to select individual partners, to narrow it down to actually be able to provide for them specific and more focused training on their specific needs. So it was essential. And again, partnering with those local partners was also a key for us.
Yeah. Mununori, how about you? And when you work with the different chapters, what does data capacity look like to you? Are you seeing more people that need to be trained, more people coming in with some training? What does that look like for you?
I think from the time we embarked on the data literacy journey, what we've discovered is that there are a lot of different skill sets which are out there with the different national societies across the board. In some of the places where we thought there would be no capacity, you find that you have people already into machine learning and doing that kind of thing, natural language processing, and you're wondering, okay, but how do you ensure that it's not only one person? And one of the challenges we do have is whenever you build capacity, you tend to lose people to other organizations or moving to other positions. So that creates that constant gap, because people keep on moving and you keep on needing to provide the trainings. And we have developed specialized trainings for mobile data collection, for humanitarian analysis, for emergency needs assessment, as well as this data literacy, which really brings the basics so that people are at a common basis of understanding so that they can take up all the other specialized trainings. But yeah, in as much as we've been building capacity, we tend to also lose that capacity. So that creates the demand.
Yeah, that's a really key challenge, right? Is that turnover in organizations, and we see that a lot. That once somebody gets into a position, maybe they move on to something else. You're always kind of trying to juggle that, and this leads to a question I have that's specifically for Ona. I think it's one for all of us, but I want to. Mununori, I want to build on that point about people coming and going. To ask Ona, anonymous attendee has anonymous. I love your work. Big fan of your work. Anonymous attendee has asked, what is the ideal team structure of an org that you've seen for your capacity building services to be most optimally used? So when you think about team structure and the whole sort of pipeline and life cycle of data when you're interacting with people, so what are there recommendations that you make, sort of general recommendations you can make about team structure, or is it really particular to each organization?
I would say that it kind of depends on what's available within the organizations, because we work from everyone from really large organizations to much smaller. And depending on that, it can depend on who has what capacity and what they're able to actually do and implement. Normally, I would say there's two components. There's collecting data digitally using a platform, and then there's kind of more the data visualization. On the data visualization around the analysis, usually that's a little bit more technical, whether that's a data analyst or maybe someone from like a monitoring and evaluation department. They're usually the ones that are managing the actual data. When you're talking about collecting the data, though, you have certain skill sets that need to be able. So for those collecting the data, you need the data collectors to be able to understand the technology they're using. So phones, tablets, computers, but they also need to understand how to collect the right information in the surveys they're filling. So that doesn't neglect all of the information and piloting that happens when they're actually developing the survey. And then you have data managers who are ensuring that the data coming in is at the quality required. You need to ensure that they understand how to collect the data and how to manage the data on the platform. And usually we like to ensure that there's someone kind of managing the overarching either projects or singular project. Is there anything you would add, Tanvir?
No, I agree with you. I mean, the structure depends from agency to from organization to organization and the depth to which they want to go. Our larger organizations definitely have actually filled out positions with skilled data analysts, with skilled solution developers, and then below them they have their subset of staff that actually now help out with specific development. So once again, it's a case-to-case basis. And so there is a generic approach to it, but then a generic approach just generally leaves a lot of gaps in addressing what you're actually trying to get to. So
yeah. Yeah, I think that's always the challenge, right? Is that we understand that particular partners or organizations are going to need some sort of form of tailored or bespoke training or help. And at the same time, in the interest of trying to scale something out, you're looking for the sort of what are the best practices, what are the sort of ideal situations. So I appreciate hearing both that's needed, but also, Megan, you mentioned that there is kind of a ideal team structure that you might look for. Paula, I'm curious, we've just got about 1 minute left, but Paula and Mununori, are there particular team structures or profiles or positions that you feel are really critical for building this capacity in an organization? Let's just give it about 10, 15 seconds for each answer. Paula, I'll start with you, and Mununori will end on you.
Sure. What we found critical in our cases was having a project manager. Obviously, it's like essential. Our logistics was super important. So regardless of the type of project or anything that we're dealing with, we need to understand how to communicate with our implementing partners. And so having that, and then also SMEs, that was essential for us.
Perfect. Thank you. Mununori?
I think for us, having somebody with the data literacy skills to understand what are the needs on the ground, and then having specialized team members who can develop specialized trainings for the different needs that have been identified.
Excellent, excellent. All right, thank you very much. Again, Tanvir Nat, Megan Schrader from ONA, Paula Garcia from Bixol, and Mununuri Mosori from IFRC. These are all groups doing great stuff. We've dropped some links into the chat for you to look into their work. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your conference. Thank you very much again to the panelists for speaking. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.